This is a tank. To be more specific, this is an outlaw. It's it's the warden mainly used tank that they use for most things. Compared to a Silverhand, this is better for showcasing. So, let's start over. There's 5 roles in tanks, which of which the outlaw got 4 of. There's a driver, there's a turrets, there's a gunner in front, there's a commander, there's also an engineer. So, let's start with something simple. Let's start with the driver. The driver's main role is to drive the tank. A thing you should note about if you're a tank driver is to always be aware of mines. There's no such thing as a friendly mine, even though it says it's green or it's blue depending on what faction you're in. It will damage you. The thing about the friendly mines, or so-called friendly mines, is that you can always see them, but they will still damage you. Another thing to note is, all mines that are on roads you can see, even if they're enemy. When you go off-road, the enemy mines can't be seen. No one inside a tank can see them. In order to see the enemy mines, you have to jump out and then back in. So, another thing to note when you're driving tank is to always listen to whoever in charge of the tank. Most usually the commander, because he can see further. So, another thing as a driver is you would always want to have an exit route. No matter where you are, you would always want to have a way to retreat. You don't want to get stuck on anything, because that can and most likely will result in you losing the tank. So, over to the next role of the tank. The next role is the gunner. The gunner's main role is to shoot and reload the gun. That is, if he doesn't have an engineer, which we'll get to later. So, as a gunner, you got access to a gun and line of sight. You can see there's a white line, which is the range. You can't shoot further than the range. And in order they work like any other gun, you fire and you reload with R. So another thing to note as a gunner is the tank consists of main parts that you can be damaged. These parts are things you want to shoot and disable them. Most common of these, which you want to target the most, is the tracks, because that will make the tank much slower, and if you get tracked on side of husks, otherwise known as damaged / destroyed buildings, you can't get out of them, because you're too slow and got no traction. Another main part of the tank which you can shoot at is the turret. Shooting the turret will completely disable it, which means they can't fire back. Another part which you can shoot at is the fuel tank. The fuel tank is in the back of the tank, roughly over here. If you destroy that, the tank will start leaking fuel and will eventually run out of it. So, over to the next row, the gunner in front. The gunner in front consists of many different depending on the tank. Some tanks like the Outlaw, machine gun, fire. Other tanks got a second gun, like the Silverhand, which got a 68mm gun in the front. Other stuff got the flamethrowers like BTs. But these are generally depending on what you got. If you got a gun, you work just like the gunner, but you got worse angles. But if you got a machine gun or a flamethrower, your main job is usually to deal with infantry flanking up on you. So, over to commander. The commander is the most important role in a tank. Why is that? He's the most important role because he got binoculars and can see further. He can see what's happening around him at all time. This makes it much easier for him to notice any threats sneaking up, which is why generally the most experienced tanker should be the commander and giving out orders to the rest of the queue on what to do and what is happening out there. His job is to always be aware of what's happening, not just in front of you, but to the sides and to the back of you. Then the last role, which I haven't talked about, is the engineer. Tanks that have the engineer role are a bit special, in the way that the gunner can't reload the gun. That's the engineer's job. The engineer reloads the gun for the gunner. So he works like a loader in a tank. Another thing the engineer does is he's the only crew member which can repair the tank from the inside. Which means you need to find a good balance between reloading the gun and repairing it. Generally speaking, loading shells into the gun. So, that's all the roles. Let's get over to some other stuff. So, the tank consists of components that can be damaged, like I said. The fuel tanks, the tracks, the turret, which I explained earlier. But the tank consists of two health systems. A health system and an armor health system. The armor works in a tank, like making the increasing the chance of someone bouncing a shell. This depletes some of the health of the armor, but makes it so the tank loses no health. The armor can't be repaired, except in garages. You can go there and repair them for 100 BMATs. So if the armor system gets destroyed, nothing will happen to the tank, except you bounce a lot less, and you can see the armor by looking at how dirty your tank is. On contrary, the health system of the tank, if that reaches 0, the tank is dead. But when the tank gets below 30%, it's become disabled. When a tank is disabled, it can't move, which means the driver is generally useless. So, let's go over to ranking the roles of a tank. And some other notable things for them. Generally, the commander should be the most experienced tanker, because the commander needs to tell the crew what to do. Then on second place, what is most important, is the driver. A good driver can make the tank survive a lot more than a bad driver, which is why it's a lot more important. So, then we got the turret. The turret is the third most important part of a tank. Because you need someone to fire at it and know where to shoot. But a low rank, if you teach them great, can and probably will do quite well in there. Then there's gunner in front and engineer. I grew up in the same place. They require little to no experience, but if there's a main gun you got in front, it's generally meant to be preferred over the turret, because they are generally bigger guns. And the engineers doesn't really require it, just tell them to prioritize reloading over repairing. So, when you get to repairing the tank, it's generally recommended for the commander to jump out the first. The commander jump out because a tank will function without them. That's generally why it's prioritized telling them to jump out. When it comes to gunner in front, if it's a machine gun, or depending on the situation, they jump out second to repair a tank. Generally speaking, the turret and driver, if you got a fully crewed tank, should never jump out to repair the tank. But if you have to choose, it's generally better to have a turret than not have a driver. So that's why driver jumps out before turrets. Most tanks, just like the outlaw I got over here, can and will work if you're two people. You need a driver and a gunner. The driver just drives the tank, and then the gunner switches between gunner and commander. So, now we're getting over to clothes. What clothes you want is a maker for tanks, and what equipment you got on you is as well. So, let's look what I have. We're gonna start with the most important stuff you need to have. It's a paddler boiler suit. This allows you to carry extra gas mask filters and VMATs. So, now we get over to other stuff everyone needs. A hammer is highly recommended for everyone to have, and it's a must. Otherwise they can't repair it. Alongside, they should have VMATs. VMATs is a must, because otherwise you can't repair the tank. And then you need a gas mask, which is gas filters. Depending on what type of battle you're fighting, you may want between like 2 extra gas mask filters to 4. It's also quite useful if you bring a bandage, so if you start bleeding, you can heal yourself. Another thing everyone needs is a radio. It's generally recommended because then you can see what's happening out on the battle, and you're not just blind and listening to a commander. Specific equipment for roles is binos for the commander. Commander must have binos, but generally speaking, it's quite good if everyone has. So if the commander dies, he can get binos from one of the crews, and the crews can jump out and see what's happening as well. Commander also usually carry a gun, some form of gun that can be used inside of the hatch and shoot out of, kind of like a second machine gun, but not really. Another thing to note, which is good to bring with you, is a wrench. You don't need many wrenches in the tank, generally just one will do fine. This wrench is needed for anyone to go outside and disable mines. So generally give this to a role which the tank can function without, such as the commander or the machine gunner. Then you also want to have always BMATs into the limit. Once you got enough of your equipment that you want, some bandages, some gas filters, a gas mask, a radio, bino and a hammer, and maybe a wrench, you want to fill up your rest of your inventory with as many BMATs as you can carry without getting over encumbered. Once you have done this, you can finally work. This is all you need to know about tanks. There's a lot other tricks that people uses, but generally this will do. So, the tank's inventory. The tank's inventory consists of two things, inventory slots for most warden tanks, or a third one, which is an open inventory slot and not locked for anything. So, here we got ammo for the main gun, 40mm, and then machine gun ammo. Generally, you want to fill up the ammo for the guns, like the main gun, or if you got a secondary gun, all the way up. All the way to the max limits, so you can fire as long as possible before you need to head back. Then you also have the machine gunner. The machine gunner doesn't need to have all his 40 shells, because it can fire for quite some time. So it's generally good if you bring 20 is fine, but if you want to, you can bring the full 40. Then, if your tank has an extra inventory slot, it's generally recommended that goes for BMATs, because that's the one thing you most times gonna need to head back to get new of, because repairing the tank takes quite a lot. Another little secret trick you can see for a tank if you need to repair it is, as the driver, if you get hit and you see smoke, smoke of the shell, that means it didn't penetrate, it exploded on the surface of the tank. But if it penetrates, you won't see the same smoke. Anyways, this has been Smadago, and have a fantastic great rest of your day. Bye!